I think one of the big takeaways for me on this path is really seeing life as being a creative act, and that everything that we do is part of our creative process, and that it seems so obvious, but when we really step into that thinking, worlds of opportunity open up to us. I think that that is the psychedelic arc, the healing journey is in essence a creative process, and that we have the capacity to bring through whatever it is, whatever vision or healing process wants to come through, and that that can benefit other people.
If you've ever felt like trauma or chronic stress dulled your creative edge, or noticed that as your nervous system recalibrates, new ideas and intuitions start coming online, this episode is for you. We're diving into the neuroscience of creativity, trauma, and even altered states, and why imagination and creativity often expand as the system becomes more flexible, more capable of presence, more attuned through nervous system rehabilitation. Whether you're an entrepreneur, practitioner, or deep in your own recovery work, we will explore how protective brain patterns can narrow possibility and how nervous system repatterning, somatic practice, and in certain contexts, psychedelic assisted therapy can reopen creative capacity in powerful ways. If you've ever felt blocked, flat, or disconnected from your imagination, this conversation will connect some dots. We're joined today by someone who lives at the intersection of creativity, consciousness, and healing, Laura Dawn. Laura is a psychedelic-informed author, researcher, and mentor who has spent more than 2 decades studying how altered states can open creative pathways, support trauma recovery, and help people reconnect with vision and possibility. Welcome to Trauma Rewired. I'm your co-host, Jennifer Wallace, educator at Neurosomatic Intelligence, founder of Sacred Synapse, and I'm a psychedelic preparation and integration guide. I've worked with women all over the world to prepare for and integrate peak somatic experiences.
And I'm your co-host, Elisabeth Kristof, founder of the Neurosomatic Intelligence Coaching Certification and BrainBase.com. And I've worked with thousands of individuals and practitioners to bring the nervous system into personal development, growth, and behavior change.
Laura, welcome so much to Trauma Rewired. This has been a really long anticipated conversation. And when we knew we were going to talk about creativity, you're the first person that came to my mind after years of kind of being outside of your realm.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and really looking forward to this conversation with you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. And Laura, before we actually started to hit record, we were talking about how we wanted to open this conversation with intentionality of how we were going to flow through it. And before we got into some of the more complex dynamics of complex trauma and how it impacts our creativity, we wanted to kind of set the stage of like, what is creativity and what are we going to talk about here? Would you like to kind of open that up for us?
Sure. And I'll just share an experience that happened to me in elementary school. And this might really resonate. Many of your listeners might have had a similar experience. And it was a traumatic experience for me. It was in grade 3, and I was sitting next to a girl named Jenica who could draw. She was like the artist in our class. And my teacher walked over and looked at what I was drawing on my paper and said, "I will never be a creative artist because I can't draw." And
Mm,
I'm sure you're familiar with Brené Brown's work. I'm a huge fan of her work.
mm-hmm.
She's done some really remarkable research. And one of the things that I heard her talking about on a podcast once was about 80% of people have had an experience in elementary school where the teacher said something to them that really negatively impacted them, that they then had that limiting belief about themselves for into adulthood. I won't say for the rest of their lives, but
Mm-hmm.
as they embarked into teenage and adulthood. And 50% of that 80% is about creativity. And
Wow.
I find that remarkable and also very relatable. And it's why I'm so passionate about this work. And I'm happy to share more about that later. But most of the audience listening is probably in our age category. I'm in my early 40s. we are products of an industrialized education system that did not support us in creativity. So
Mm-mm.
a lot of people, and I love interacting with people who, really reveal these old outdated models of what creativity is, because we're stepping into an era where creativity is more important than ever before. And especially in the past 2 decades, there's been so much research done. And just like the fixed mindset research, very similar research has been done around creativity, that people who have a fixed belief, you're either born with it or you don't. You're not. You either have it or you don't, that they have reduced capacity to be creative. So I like to start here so that we can sort of gain our bearings as we go into this conversation. Usually, I play this game with a few people, at least an audience, and it's always so interesting what comes back. But maybe we could just play a fun game between me and you, a
Let's
word
do it.
association game.
Okay.
Okay, I'll warm you up. So basically, and it's so incredible to watch when hundreds and hundreds of people do this, and then dialogue spurs from this. And if
This
you're
is
listening to this,
creativity.
yeah. I'd love for you, if you're listening to this, just blurt out the word the moment I say a word. We're gonna play word association. The moment I say a word, just blurt out the first thing that comes to mind, which is a fun creative game. So we'll do a practice.
Okay.
Bananas.
Apes.
I think bananas and I immediately think peanut butter. It's like
Oh.
half my diet. But it's amazing to see the variety that people have. Okay, so when I say creativity, what's the first word that pops to mind?
Flow.
Flow.
I
Okay, great.
actually see something that I'm trying to put into words. I see almost like, instead of it being, when you go through a car wash and you have all the colors that come through, and then there's like water, and all of a sudden there's like all this flow of color. I see that, but in paint. That's why that word, I think, comes up.
When I do this with large groups, it's amazing the variety that people express. Sometimes I've heard someone say, I do this also with Uber drivers and in Lyft rides. And one time an Uber driver said to me, immediately blurted out, "Not me." And I think that
Mm.
that's a big theme for a lot of people.
Mhm.
And I also had that feeling and that belief, and it's so interesting. I had my first high dose psilocybin journey when I was 14. I've been teaching programs for many, many years, and at one point I came across something about creativity, and I realized, wow, a lot of my work talks about creativity, but because I have this huge blind spot, I wasn't seeing a lot of connections that were there. And it was actually Manesh Gurn's paper on updated beliefs about psychedelics and creativity that inspired me to go back to graduate school. And so while I was in school, we learned about what is called the 4 Ps of creativity. This is a Melrose model from the 60s, and this is going to help set the stage for everyone here. So, and before I actually share the 4 Ps, how do you define creativity, Jennifer? What is your general definition of how you think about it?
Well, I wanna say first, had you asked me, I wanna just circle back a little bit to the very beginning, because I had limiting beliefs of, I had to be in having a real job, and artists don't make money, because I was
Mhm.
very creative growing up. I was great at drawing, and that was like what I really wanted to do, and it was just driven into me that, no, you have to have a real job. And let me tell you, I went against that grain for decades, and I was terrible at school. I mean, I was just terrible at going to business school and taking communications classes and all of that. And so fast forward into these past like 5 years, had you asked me 5 years ago about creativity, I probably would have been like, want, desire, please. Like, I want that. And so a lot of messaging between me and Elizabeth over the past few years has been around like the art that I'm just creating for fun. And so for
Yes.
me, creativity is maybe has something to do with like my essence, my ideas, my self coming into expression in a 3D form for fun.
Awesome. That's great. And for those of you listening, think about how you define creativity too. And this makes for such a rich discussion, and I love what you also named, that the beliefs and the sayings that our parents taught us about creativity, which is
Mhm.
so interesting. I grew up in a very musical household. Both of my brothers are professional musicians. My mom studied music. My grandmother and my great-grandmother were all musicians. And so a lot of my wound around creativity was a belonging wound. Like,
Mm.
"Oh, I don't belong here because I'm not that version of creative, because I don't play music the way that other people play music in my tribe, in my family." And so thank you for, like, explicitly naming that, because I think everyone can relate to some kind of version. Some of us were fostered into that, and other people, we weren't. We were in the system
Mhm.
of industrialization. How do we plug into the system and get a real job? And so, yeah, and this is where it gets so rich. So in the creativity literature, and I'll just name that when I went back to school, there was maybe 6 papers on psychedelics and creativity. So most of the literature is non-existent. And so what the focus of my 3-year study was actually looking at the existing literature and putting a creative research lens on the existing literature and connecting dots that no one else had connected yet. And we could talk a little bit more about that. Creativity can be divided up into 4, according to Mel Rhodes. I developed the model into 5 Ps of creativity. It was a big part of my focus. So there's the creative person. Who are you? What experiences have you had that no one else has had? What is your mindset? What are your beliefs? I've already been naming a lot of this already.
Mhm.
What kind of personality traits? Are you high on neuroticism, low on neuroticism, high on conscientiousness? Those big 5 personality traits, for example. That is all different aspects of what makes a person creative. How do we perceive the world? What culture are we in? Are we in a Western worldview, an indigenous worldview? And then we have the creative process. You kind of named that in your definition. And for those of you who are visual, I am so visual. I'm imagining 5 overlapping circles.
Mhm.
Okay. So you can't separate the creative person from the creative process, right? You named this. My essence, my something inside of me is coming out and expressing into the world. And your intention underlying that you named as fun, which I think is an important nuance here when, and we can talk more about this too. What is driving that? And we can think about the creative process. I think of it as an idea that comes from somewhere. We're going to talk about insight, I hope, in this conversation, but like, where does insight come from? We could look at that from a neuroscience perspective, from a shamanic perspective, from a spiritual perspective. But in the process, I have some idea, some vision, and I'm translating that into reality. So there's an implementation, there's an arc. And when we translate something, an idea in our mind into reality, and that can take many, many different forms. Me re-narrating the story of who I am and what I believe to be true, my life story, is part of that process. So is developing an innovative app or building a new technology.
Mhm.
And so there's the creative person, the creative process, and then the outcome of that is what we call the creative product. That's the third P. I think of it in terms of outcomes, in terms of reframing it towards contribution, which I think is a really important reframe for the time that we're living in right now,
Mhm.
is how am I creating in a way that's also benefiting other people, even if I'm just sharing it with a friend who is delighting in the process of receiving something that was created. Could be a meal. It doesn't have to be, poetry, song, dance. It can be that, but it's really can include anything, idea into form. That's the creative product outcome. How I think about it is in terms of contribution. And then we have this really amazing aspect of creativity, which is the creative place. It was initially called press, like how our environment structures us in a way that informs how we think. And the intersection between architecture and creative cognition is extremely fascinating. And part of the reason that I live outside is because this is the environment that is the most beneficial to my creative process. It's the
Mhm.
place that I'm in. We could speak for hours just on that. And then we have creative practices. How do I learn practices to help enhance my version, my form of creativity? And so when we look at an actual one definition of creativity, we can look at all aspects of that. And we can also look at finding novel, original ideas and solutions to solving any kind of problem at hand. And so there's really a lot to unpack there. And when we look at anything talking about creativity, healing, transformation, it's helpful to understand, okay, what aspect of creativity are we actually really talking about here? And in my graduate work, I actually map those 5 Ps onto here, I'll give you a clue. The creative person in your environment. What does that make you think of? Person in place. What is one of the most strongest pillars that we know about psychedelics and going into journey work? We always talk
S-
about the 2
Set and
S's.
setting.
Great. So now that we're actually thinking, okay, can we take this creativity literature and really map it on? How are we preparing someone for a journey? What kind of outcomes are we looking at? And in Western culture, in the medicalized, even in the therapeutic spaces, we're really looking at traditionally a reduction of mental health or mental illness symptoms, dysfunctional systems that hold us back in life. And we can reframe that and say, how do we work with preparation, setting, integration to help us flourish, to help us be more creative? And when we align with that outcome, everything changes how we prepare people, the space that we have.
Yeah, the way that we do I'm so glad you brought this up because the way that we look at setting is really or the set part is part of the belief system. Like, what are you
Absolutely.
believing about this and what are you going in to change? Because this default mode network and all these belief systems, all this identity can all
Yes.
be shifted. It
Yes.
is you are rewirable. I did a ton of
Absolutely.
work even to just be on here and have a voice and have a
Mm.
podcast took so much belief change in me. And then it took so much more to be like, well, I have this podcast. I'm pretty creative over here with my voice. I feel good about that. And now, how do I translate this into being artistic? Because I really want to connect with that again and really desired to connect with the little girl in me that got that stripped away.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So
Right.
beliefs is a huge part of the set.
Right. And bringing those beliefs to the surface. And one of the
Mhm.
ways that we can actually do that is really look at, well, what were your beliefs in your household? What are those phrases that your parents used to tell you?
Yep.
And bring some of that to the surface. And I referenced that at the beginning too. I love that research around fixed belief around creativity because it really shows that if you don't have the belief that you're creative, then actually you perform much, much lower on creative problem solving tests.
Mhm.
And life is one big fun obstacle course of creative problem solving,
There's a lot of creative
especially
problem solving, yes.
exactly. That's what it is. And so it's interesting to think about creativity because there is it is as multifaceted as there are creative people alive. Everyone, we are creative by definition of being alive. So when we look at creativity and what we're talking about, it's very multidimensional and complex and nuanced. We're really talking about what it means to be human.
Mhm.
Period. Like
Mhm.
that is synonymous with that. So when we hold
Yes.
that broader view, we're like, okay. And that is even a world paradigm shifting insight for people.
Yeah, it is. Well, it is foundational as to who we are just when you think of problem solving from the beginning of time and look at what all has been created around us that we live in. Coaches and therapists, if you love your work, but you're feeling stretched, depleted, or like you're carrying too much alone, we want to invite you into something different.
The Neurosomatic Intelligence certification is now enrolling, and at its core, this program is about capacity, expanding your nervous system's ability to hold clients, leadership, complexity, growth, without burning out or self-sacrificing.
You're not doing this in isolation. You train inside a community, monthly community calls, bi-weekly practice pods for real peer-to-peer coaching, live coaching calls, and office hours. This is where confidence, regulation, and skills are built together.
And this includes business development support, so you learn how to integrate this work into your practice, communicate it clearly, and grow in a way that's sustainable, embodied, and aligned with your nervous system.
As your own capacity expands, you become a stronger source of co-regulation for clients, teams, and communities, while building a practice that can actually support you long-term.
This is an inclusive, growth-oriented community of practitioners who are really shaping the future together. We would love for you to join us.
This is the only certification and cohort we're running this year. Enrollment is open now and closes March 20th.
You can learn more or apply at neurosomatic.com, and the link will be in the show notes.
What a disservice to the world that we have been programmed to think that artists can't make money, considering what
Mm,
would the world look like if it was full of artists who really believed in themselves? I think we would be much more community driven, and I think
absolutely.
we would be a much more tender,
Mhm,
kind
mhm.
place.
Yeah, I think it requires a major reorientation, a systemic change in what we value and how we narrate and communicate what we value to other people.
Mhm.
I don't know if you're familiar, actually, I have it right here, John O'Donohue's book. It stays on my desk because I read it all the time. Do you know this book, The Invisible Embrace, Beauty?
I have not heard that
Oh,
before.
so incredible. He talks in this book about how every crisis that we're experiencing right now can all be traced back to a lack of attention to beauty, and art is part of that. It's in the category, it's not only that. Natural beauty, beautiful ideas fall into that category as well, but we prioritize, I mean, we all know our Western cultural values are speed, optimization, extraction, and that yeah, when we don't allow ourselves to actually value beauty in our culture, that's what leads to where we're at right now. I don't know if you saw that, but Ireland actually just implemented a basic income for all artists.
Mhm.
Did
I
you s
saw that.
Which I think is amazing. That's the direction. That's a creative solution. That's a kind of value of a culture that I wanna be a part of,
Mhm.
really.
I love what you were just talking about the reorientation to beauty as part of a bigger collective change, because this whole season we're looking at post-traumatic growth, and one of the things I really wanted to talk to both of you about was what does that open up beyond just the individual? And there's so much healing potential in being creative, and so many ways to work with our patterning and our past trauma by bringing creativity in, but beyond just the individual, what does it open up for society when we start to expand into creativity in the possibility of creating something new in post-traumatic growth on a collective level as we start to foster more creativity?
Kinda comes back to one of the P's around the creative product outcome. I think of it in terms of contribution, and that everything that we're doing in our lives is can be defined as a form of creative contribution.
Uh-huh.
So, but when we take it a step further, what is that contribution in alignment with? What value, what North Star are we orienting towards? And that's where getting clear on, actually, are we creating in alignment with our own personal values? Is that in alignment, or is our vision in alignment with our values? And I think that that is a more nuanced approach. Of course, we can create apps and innovative technologies. Is this serving us? Right now, AI is seeping into every dimension of our lives. I don't think a lot of people have really stopped to ask themselves, is this supporting me? Is this in alignment with my values? And we have lost the capacity for nuance as a culture. But even recently, about a year ago, I stopped using ChatGPT for writing because I stopped and really was 2 years, and I looked at my writing and I said, "Actually, this is really degraded. My writing process is really degraded,
Uh-huh.
and I stand for human creativity." And I was actually losing the connection to my voice, and I love, Jennifer, that you mentioned voice too, which is such a powerful creative force in our lives, what we share, its resonance, and I really reflected on that and was like, wow, my unique voice is now going into a homogenized generic filter that
Mhm.
is creating more sameness,
Mhm.
more ubiquity, more just mediocre vanilla. And it's been hard actually unfurling from that. It
Uh-huh.
creates more friction, but actually there's creativity in the friction as well. And there's so much that we could actually unpack around this, but really emphasizing the point that what we create as a person in our process, the outcomes we're aimed for, when it's in alignment with what we believe to be true, for, in alignment with some of the original principles, reciprocity, respect for all life, regenerative living, then that is a more unstoppable force. So of
Mhm.
course we can call everything creative, Every corporation has workers that are coming up with ideas and bringing that into reality. Some of them are beneficial for humanity, but a lot isn't actually because we're misaligned with our value system.
That's what I'm thinking about when you're talking about the North Star and you were talking about the collective. It's like, what is the collective North Star? I mean, do we have, I mean, there's so much division. And how much does the division that the intentional division that we experience impact what's really possible for us as a nation, for us as for us as a world?
And I think on that
Mhm.
individual level too, there's so much in what you were talking about in aligning and being in integrity with what I'm creating and even having the capacity to, like you were saying, to look at something like chat and be like, this is not in alignment. This isn't fostering creativity in the way that I want. And can I start to question what am I creating and how is that contributing to the growth?
Absolutely. I think one of the most prominent North Stars that I've been paying attention to is acceleration and speed. Everything that we talk about, time management, optimization, productivity hacks, it's all in the name of how can I do things faster?
Mhm.
And even with ChatGPT, it's like so much output. It's like there's just for me, it allowed me to stop and say, actually, what I value is depth over speed. And it's really hard to actually choose that in our culture. Talk
Mhm.
Mhm.
about trauma. I think we are, as a culture, trying to survive capitalism. And we're placing everything inside that matrix. And it makes it very difficult to actually say, oh, I'm going to align with this North Star when people are just trying to feed their families.
Yeah.
People are surviving right now, big time.
Mhm.
And so, and I wanna name that because I think a lot of people might listen to this and be like, "Creativity? Like, that is such a fucking privilege to talk about that." But we can actually reframe how we're even that's why I wanted to open up with the 5 Ps because it's like, this is what it means to be alive. How do we work with that catalytic force to actually create in contribution to the greater good in some capacity?
This is some of the deepest work that we even do in people's nervous systems is getting them to slow down because people want to
Yeah.
go into healing, they want to go into psychedelics, they want to go and they want to hit it so hard because they need it now, they want change right now, and it's like we can't go at healing the way that
Mhm.
we've been living in trauma and in survival. We have got to slow things down, and that's really threatening for people to learn how to slow down and to start like reprogramming those narratives of fast now. But we see it in biohacking, right? Healing our bodies physically. It's really
Mhm.
like do this right now. And it's like, gosh, it's terrible
Mhm.
program because that is capitalism in the body.
Yeah, it's the urgency that comes at us in so many ways from being in chronic stress, maybe from development and being comfortable in those patterns in the nervous system, and then
Mhm.
the big collective that we are all navigating through that just perpetuates that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's so funny because people think, "Oh, slow living is just this aesthetic that people post on Instagram." Slow living has been one of the most hardcore teachers that has been kicking my ass, like, so hard. It is actually a deep psychological restructuring and reframing of how we orient to time and to reality. I've been really deep in it, actually. I've just taken the last 9 months off, and this is one of the first interviews I'm doing since I took a bunch of time off to reprogram, and even that, it takes a long time, and I think we
Mhm.
Mhm.
want transformation to happen quick, and sometimes it does happen like that, but more often than not, slow and steady. Slow and steady sets the pace. It's just little increments every day. And it is reconstructing our psyche is like actually it takes time and we want that to be slow process.
Yeah. Absolutely. I totally agree.
Yeah, relate to that. It's been a very long journey. The journey of being able to rest has been a slow-paced journey. It had to be for me, and it's still in my life, like, it's still something I
It's still
navigate
a journey right
all
now
of the
that I'm
time.
on.
Yeah, it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and opening up the creative portal for me is, it's like anything where you haven't been doing it for, a couple of decades. It's like you've just got to start doing it
Mhm.
and being having some freedom with it and thinking that, like, look, I'm not going into this thinking that I'm about to sell this watercolor. Which
Mhm.
can be its old programming too, where it's like I really want to be good at something when I do it, but just being
Mhm.
experimental, using a lot of nature and just knowing that, like, I'm just doing this for fun now.
Yeah.
And that has taken a lot. It's taken years.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it can take a lot of different forms. Like, I play music and love to dance and garden and do all those fun things. Professionally, the way that my creativity shows up is through curriculum, through writing curriculum, and through building new models. And I think, and this is especially relevant for us in the psychedelic space. I think there's so many people who entered the psychedelic space from this old educational mindset where it's like, you need to tell me the way it is, right? This is the model that I'm inheriting. Set and setting is the model. We show up as students and we're like, okay, tell me how this is supposed to look. We have the three pillars: preparation, the journey, integration. I'm really big into breaking frame, and that's what creativity is. So even in that three-part model, and that's what I teach my students is like, think for yourself, think outside the box, question what you're learning, and work with medicines and your direct experience to actually build new frames. And that's what they do. And we could talk more about that. But even with the three pillars, I felt like everyone was neglecting rest. After 20 years of working people in integration, everyone goes from journey back into their daily lives. The hardest part for people was actually just scheduling 4 days off to sleep and not do
Mhm.
anything.
Mhm.
Yep, I see that over and over again.
Yeah.
Right, and so I built it into the model. I was like, "Okay, now everyone be good students and follow the model," where
Mhm.
is kind of a hypocrisy in that, but in a fun way, So it's like, "Okay, let's prepare, let's go through the journey, and then rest for 4 or 5 days, and don't do anything." And actually sleep and cognition, sleep and creativity are so you can't think creatively if you're sleep
Mm-mm.
deprived. It's actually foundational. It's foundational to thinking clearly.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
relate very much to what you were talking about and the many ways that creativity can show up. And some of my ability to reconnect to my creativity has had to be expanding what creativity looks like so that for me, I know it shows up a lot in curriculum or
Mhm.
in research and thinking about things differently. And how are we going to talk about this
Absolutely.
on the podcast? And as I have learn to resource my nervous system and have more rest, I have more creativity to look at frameworks differently, just like you were talking about. And like, do I, are there other avenues for this, even somatic work or applied
Mhm.
neurology? Does
Mhm.
it always have to look like this? Is there different ways that we can start to play with and open up some of these things? And that
Yeah.
also comes from having more capacity, being able to rest, and then being able to open up and see things in a new way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And finding, like, what's true for you in
Mhm.
this.
Mhm.
Where does this resonate? Where doesn't it resonate? And, Einstein was incredibly creative. I mean, in the capacity to think and formulate questions is one of the hallmarks of creativity. Asking different questions opens up a different way of perceiving. So there's so many forms, and that's why it's like it's so funny to talk about creativity because we're really just talking about what it means to be human,
Mhm.
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yep.
Yeah, I
Yep.
agree.
Yeah. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's kind of opening me up right now, honestly.
Cool. What I would love to hear a little bit from you on this because as I was preparing for this episode and we were doing some research, I was also thinking about lived experience. And so many of the people who come to work with us, we work a lot in the field of complex trauma,
Yep.
are deeply creative people, right? So there is something there, I think, about having these big experiences that also creates changes in the way that our brain processes sensory information. We think of complex trauma as a type of neurodivergence in the way that it
Mhm.
shifts how our brain processes sensory information, how it integrates it. And with all types of neurodivergence, that there can be complexities to that, complexities in navigating the world, but it can also open up new ways of thinking, new ways of processing that are inherently creative. And so, even though there are ways that our trauma and chronic stress can limit our creativity by keeping us in survival states and taking away that ability to rest and integrate, keeping our resources focused on survival. I think there are other ways that it's more layered than that. There are other ways too where
Mhm,
there can be gifts that come from our experiences that allow us to feel more deeply or to see things differently, to connect in a different way. That is really beautiful to also talk about and explore when we're thinking about complex trauma and creativity.
mhm.
Do you see that in your work and in your research with creativity, people who are coming to you maybe with a high ACE score, high developmental trauma history, and tapping back into that creativity that's potentially there from those experiences?
I think complex trauma is also really rising to the cultural surface right now. It was interesting. I was doing a bunch of reading actually before I came onto the podcast. I mentioned to Jennifer, I was like, I'm not actually an expert in complex trauma. My whole training is trauma informed. So I did a bunch of research on it and I was like, okay, this makes sense. We're actually some people, it doesn't for me seem very different than people growing up in than when train people in attachment theory, for example. So, my understanding of complex trauma is that there's reiteration of the same kind of trauma over and over again. That's what you're a child, you're growing up in a household, your parent is abandoning you. They don't have a loving, secure base for you to explore, and that is how we're raised with that perceptual worldview. Am I framing that accurately as an
Yes.
example of complex trauma?
Very much so. We view complex trauma at its root as a relational wound and not
Uh-huh.
one acute experience, but the developmental waters that you're swimming in that create
Yeah.
those long lasting nervous system patterns and
Mhm.
brain processing pathways that are shaped over
Mhm.
time.
Yeah. Okay, great. So when I think about it in terms of that childhood developmental trauma, when I'm working with people, it really does take a similar arc and it's going to look different for everyone. So I think of creativity as the mechanism for the arc of healing. And that has a lot of different components to it. So when we're talking about, well, what aspects of creativity are we talking about? When we look at the creative person, what we're going for is instead of a contracted, defensive, narrow worldview, we're actually as a foundational base just helping people regulate, enhance, and widen their windows of tolerance, learning what it means to be a secure base for themselves. I
Mhm.
actually weave in some really interesting training around embodied dignity as a pathway to healing worth. It's really interesting. So when we look at actually nervous system regulation, actually being able to develop safe relationships with other people, and we start that rewiring with or without psychedelics, that then there is natural capacities that come online. If I'm contracted in a narrow worldview, that's a very defensive physiological stance.
Mhm.
And when I relax and open, obviously literally my perceptual worldview starts to open. So naturally, I think that things start to come online. And then of course we can work with people. We've been talking about vision and values. There's so much here. It's like really talking about healing and transformation. For me, it's all creative. That's really how I frame and structure it in my mind. So it's sort of like an arc that we're helping people move through. And we can look at so many different dots. So one of the things I was talking about when I went back to graduate school, I was looking at the existing literature through a creative lens. And one of the main things, one of the main connections, and I'm pretty sure it's in complex trauma as well, one of the predictors of post traumatic growth is psychological flexibility.
Mhm.
So, from physiological flexibility, where we're starting to actually become more adaptive, more open, then we can actually work with the mind and start training psychological flexibility. And this is, of course, where psychedelics come into play because it has a big role in psychological flexibility. And for those who are unfamiliar with that research, psychological flexibility is highly correlated to creative achievement. So there's a really straight line that we can connect um, between trauma, post-traumatic growth, psychological flexibility, psychedelics, and creativity. That is a lot that we can dive into there. So when we look at, okay, well, how do we start helping people? And we can do this through preparation and through integration, helping people get psychological flexibility online. That also brings a whole bunch of new avenues and pathways for people to start thinking about, okay, creativity and how am I bringing through it's tricky to answer this question because when I'm zooming out and what I started to talk about at the beginning was how creativity is overlaid on the set and setting. And so when we allow people to come into preparation from the view that creativity is embedded in how we prepare people, how we set up the space, how we prepare set and setting, and how we integrate, all of a sudden you see it all as creative. And so it's hard to pull apart the threads because it's all there,
Mhm.
right? And so the outcome, for example, for someone recovering from trauma, it might be creativity applied to an updated personal narrative. We might work with narrative identity therapy. It might not be, it might be someone singing a song to help them process. That even is still a process of mine today. But it actually could go deeper psychologically on a psyche reconstruction narrative that actually, I'm just starting to believe that who I am in the environment that I'm in is different than the story I previously told myself. So even that is a creative act.
That is what I was gonna say next is, like, so much what I see is that people see their stories from a completely different lens, and that is not only deeply empowering for people to have that more expansive state, but it starts the
Mhm,
rewiring process of, like, well, life can look so much differently because that wasn't what I've been telling myself for all this time, however long that is, isn't actually the real story of who I
mhm,
am, and I am not what happened to me.
mhm.
That psychological flexibility that
Yeah.
you were speaking about, as we start to open that up, then we can tap into some
Mhm.
of those inherent gifts and for the expression
Mhm,
there. Yeah, it's really beautiful.
Yeah. I would like to talk a little bit more about DMN rigidity, the salience network, and the interoceptive network,
uh-huh.
and how all of this does come into play. And let's just stay on that thread of
Yeah.
psychological
Okay, great.
flexibility, psychedelics,
Mhm.
and making the creativity connections and letting people really get a bigger um, understanding of like the work that we do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'd love for you
yeah,
to tell us a little bit more about some of the changes that happen, maybe with the
Yeah.
DMN and
yeah.
how that impacts creativity.
One of the things I think that would be helpful as a visual and a metaphor for people start thinking about it and sort of anchoring what I was just saying and to build on that. I've struggled with addiction in my life. Many people can relate to some kind of bad habit. So, trauma is a little harder for some people to understand, but addiction or bad habit, like your mind keeps going towards, like, I shouldn't eat that. I want to eat that. Maybe I should wait till after 6 to eat that, for example. Or it might be any kind of struggle that whether it's stimulants or anything like that. So I in my teenage years had a real challenge with different forms of addiction. It's like being a hamster in a wheel. Okay? So it's like that's the image and the metaphor and I think a lot of people can get that. Trauma is similar. And that's what we're thinking about when we're thinking about rigidity. We're actually going around the same wheel. And this is where, for example, after you have a traumatic experience, there are different ways that you can ruminate on it. You can have intrusive rumination about what just happened, or you can have reflective rumination about what just happened. So we can't say thinking and say one thing. We have to think of everything in terms of is this adaptive or is this maladaptive? Is
Mhm.
this helping me or is this hurting me? Is this rumination intrusive in a way that it's automatic and it's blocking me from doing other things and thinking about other things? Or am I in a place of reflection? How can I learn from what just happened? How can I grow through this? And I think that that's a really helpful frame for people to think about A, everything is a double edged sword. So is it adaptive or maladaptive? And things that are extremely adaptive, like psychedelics, can also be extremely maladaptive. And we're witnessing that. right? We're opening
Mhm.
critical periods, and people are like, "Yay, we're opening critical periods." And I'm like, "Y'all better be very careful about where, when, and how you open that because you can re-imprint, and healing trauma
Mhm.
is relational healing." And that's why actually, to answer your earlier question, actually so much of what I see is people coming to me who have had deeply traumatic experiences in psychedelic journeys themselves, which
Same.
Mhm.
is very, very sad.
Yep.
So and that's very high on my list, and so which is so unfortunate. So, but the hamster wheel analogy is important, and let me come back to that because when you're a hamster on the wheel, and let's say you're struggling with this ruminative thinking about trauma or ruminative thinking about the thing that, whether it's food addiction or stimulant addiction or alcohol or drug abuse, you have to have a new thought to step off the hamster wheel. You have to have a novel thought. One of my favorite definitions of creativity, Arthur Koestler, says that creativity is the defeat of habit by originality.
Mm.
Okay, so that's what creativity is. I'm going to get off the hamster wheel by having a new thought, by having a novel idea. That, remember, we started at the beginning of the conversation. That is one of the definitions of creativity: novel, original solution to solve the problem at hand. So that applies to trauma, it applies to addiction, and it's also the definition of creativity. Do you see where I'm going with
Mhm.
this?
Mhm.
The reason that psychedelics help to enhance that is because psychedelics are pattern disruptors. And this is where we could talk about the default mode network, the medial prefrontal cortex, which is all about self referential processing. For anyone who has struggled with trauma or addiction, you might relate to this where it's all about me, 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 me. Me, what do I do now? When do I can how do I stay safe? How do I protect myself? It's all self-referential, ego based. And your whole construct of your worldview is based on that. And psychedelics are really miraculous in their ability to just kick that off its ledge and to disrupt that. And all of a sudden, we have an the technical term is decentering, although I don't love that term because it's really just shifting perspective, looking at something from a different angle. That's one of many mechanisms that psychedelics help us to do. That again, all has to do with the medial prefrontal cortex and how we relate to emotion, cognition, the story of me, the narration. I am this person in this world, and we all of a sudden have this anti-structure, right? So it's entropy, it's anti-structure. So we're structured, we're so structured, we're so in that hamster wheel structure, and then all of a sudden we have this open window of anti-structure. And so what we do with that is, again, holds so much promise and also so much peril if we're not working with that in a good way, right? And how we integrate that on the other side is everything. And there's so many other aspects that we could talk about with psychedelics as pattern disruptors and the neuroscience there, but I think that that's a helpful aspect of it, and psychological flexibility is a key mechanism in that. It is a key role, which is why acceptance and commitment therapy is being studied so heavily in the psychedelic space for good reason. Really happy that it's going more and more in that direction for really good reason.
I really wish we would do studies with NSI and psychedelic therapy because what I have found is that what we do in nervous system intelligence, neurosomatic intelligence, and psychedelics is two of the most powerful modalities. And I've seen such incredible transformation, even just with the two of us sitting here, about what is really possible when you create safety. You already start to open up that psychological flexibility before you get this boost of potentially, hopefully, more adaptive plasticity. And then you've
Mhm.
also the emotional context, the emotional capacity in a person, the ability to feel sensations. This is a really primary experience in psychedelic therapy too, because so many of the people that I've worked with don't have visuals. They journey in their bodies somatically. And so, with somebody who has experienced chronic dissociation for so long, they can't feel what's happening. And then on the back end, well, first of all, it's really scary in the experience, but that neuroplasticity, that maladaptive experience starts to compound the trauma on the back end instead of it making this. What the industry so freely thinks of as like a band-aid or do this one time or anything is possible and you can change this, just do this medicine. And it's like, wow, this is really dangerous. And it's dangerous for people, I feel, with complex trauma. So I really put a huge emphasis on preparation. And
Absolutely.
that way, once you do have that additional flexibility of neuroplasticity, you also have
Mhm,
already started new habits. You
mhm,
understand and have some altitude on your beliefs, what you're thinking, how you're behaving before you go in to just think, like, I'm going to do this one time and I'm going to change my life. And sure, maybe that person exists, but I
mhm.
don't think that's
Yeah.
a really great
And to have
representation.
the skill and the capacity to be able to embody the experience, like we talk a lot about like the nervous system sometimes just needs one good rep in order to know something is possible. But I think also that rep has to be whole system
Mhm.
embodied.
Mhm.
And so to be able to have that experience of like I'm off the hamster wheel, I see something with new altitude or I have a new idea, but
Mhm,
it's a whole body experience that can then
mhm.
be the sensory experience that begins to repattern. And I think that is some of what makes psychedelics so powerful,
Mhm.
because you get that and then being able to translate that into life and have the preparation to be able to hold that.
Yeah.
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 Mhm. Yeah, I kind of think of it as discomfort resiliency training.
Hmm.
That's really how I think of almost all psychedelic work. Yeah, sometimes we go into these amazing ecstatic states that are incredibly visionary. Usually, I only get to that part after I'm going through extreme discomfort and
Hmm.
actually learning to sit with it and stay with it. And that's where acceptance and commitment therapy, I think, is so foundational, is actually how do we learn to stay with what we're
Mhm.
feeling without
Hmm.
exiting,
Mhm.
without
Yes.
bolting, without, exit stage left, this is too hard, I can't process it. But actually, in ceremony, we're learning how to stay and how to make direct contact with what we're feeling.
And
And
lear
that's where it's like there's actually a huge connection between compassion and forgiveness and creativity that no one
Mhm.
talks about.
Mm.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Go ahead, what were you gonna say?
And without collapsing, right? Learning
Without
to
collapse
not collapse before you go into a peak state experience. Gosh,
or
do
sometimes having a secure base with you where you could be like, "Look, I really just need to, like, completely collapse. Can you hold me? Do you got
Mhm.
this?"
Mhm.
yes. Well, the
Right?
the
Where
sitter,
actually
there I mean, it's so important to know who you're sitting with and to build
absolutely.
that trust so that you can fully surrender into what is
Yeah.
happening in the experience.
I love you for you just to expand a little bit on the components of how self-compassion and forgiveness relate to
Mhm.
creativity and just
Yeah.
elaborate on that point that you were talking about.
Yeah, I think it's so important because even on a physiological level, when what are we experiencing when we're experiencing compassion and forgiveness? We're experiencing an opening, essentially. There's an opening there. We're putting down armor, we're removing barriers. These are metaphors, but they're also very real experiences that we have where we're actually able to bring closure. A great practice, and this is such an essential one for people who are like, "I don't even know where to begin with self-compassion." Whatever it is that you're going through when you're in the hot seat, when you're in the ceremony and you're, like, burning in the fire of, like, "Whoa, this is intense right now." Take a moment to connect to someone else and send someone else a blessing, a sacred prayer, someone going through a hard time, or you can also make it for everyone that is on the planet also suffering in the same way that you're suffering. So
Mhm.
if you're healing from depression, may all people really struggling with depression right now actually find a moment of relief and healing. And these are really powerful practices. They're connection-based practices, and notice what that is doing. It's self-transcendent. You're moving out of the hamster wheel of me, my problems, and you're thinking bigger. You're actually literally opening your mind by expanding to include other people in an intention, in a prayer. And so and this is all Buddhist philosophy is that thousands and thousands of years old, right? But it's actually a really big part of the frameworks that I teach because it is where the healing happens. We could talk about default mode network, medial prefrontal cortex when they're blue in the face. Actually, talking about compassion is really where catalytic healing starts happening from and where creativity starts to come online as a result of that, right?
Mhm. I think that's such wise advice to when you're in the fire, whether it's a ceremony or like the ceremony of life, like you're in the
Yes.
moment of that spot of face down on the floor to expand that way and to offer a prayer or to send love and hope and whatever comes to you to the people experiencing the same suffering. And
Right.
I think it's a really beautiful way to open up and move out in a way that
Yeah.
really
Mhm.
serves.
And it opens the channels of reciprocity, which
Hmm.
we were
Yeah.
talking about in the very beginning too, of like being a
Mhm.
foundational piece of the human experience too.
Right, and it also can weave in, altruism, where it's like, "Okay, actually, I really wanna heal this, and I'm gonna learn about this so I can share this with other people to help other people
Hmm.
heal." I mean, your message is your medicine. We know this. So much of us are teaching and on our journey of our own healing journey, which I think has some nuance there, but it comes back to that creative contribution of, like, how do I transmute, re-narrate, reconfigure what I believe is possible actually with the benefit of other people in mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
It's a
Yeah.
beautiful place to land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any closing thoughts that you would love to leave people with, knowing that this is a podcast for practitioners and folks dealing with complex trauma as they're thinking about creativity and post-traumatic growth, and also where people
Sure.
could find you?
Oh, thank you so much for that invitation. I think one of the big takeaways for me on this path is really seeing life as being a creative act, and that everything that we do is part of our creative process, and that it seems so obvious, but when we really step into that thinking, worlds of opportunity open up to us. And there's so much more that we could talk about, but I think that is the creative, the psychedelic arc, the healing journey is in essence a creative process, and that we have the capacity to bring through whatever it is, whatever vision or healing process wants to come through, and that can benefit other people. Um, yeah, gosh, there's so much we didn't talk about that I wish we could get into, but there's just we'll
We
have
would
to maybe do a
We're
always
gonna
part
have to
love
2
do
to
once
this
have
we
you
dig.
again.
back. Yeah, we would love to have you again. Yeah. But
Um, but
beautiful
yeah, my
conversation.
my
Yeah.
home base, my website is, lauradon.co, and that's where you can find all my upcoming offerings and such, and on Instagram, where I share more of my outdoor lifestyle here at Live Free Laura D. So, thank you both so
Wonderful.
much
Thank
for
you.
Thank
having me. It
you.
was
Thank
Thank
you,
really a
you.
joy.
Laura. Thank you so much. And maybe we connect next time you're in Austin.
Yeah, I would
Okay.
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.